Good morning, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Assemblywoman Petrie-Norris. As we all know, budget negotiations are well underway in Sacramento, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Assemblymember Mullen. We'll be sharing an update on our work to restore California's research and development tax credit for California's life sciences companies as part of this year's budget. Also, we will be sharing a sneak preview of a forthcoming study from the Milken Institute, which highlights the importance of the R&D tax credit in preserving California's long-term competitiveness. Pleased to be joined today by Matt Horton from the Milken Institute and also by Oliver Recroy from California Life Sciences Association. Just very briefly, by way of introduction, we know this is a pivotal moment for California. We have hit a turning point in our fight against COVID-19. The miracle of the COVID-19 vaccine has become a reality. Schools are opening, businesses are opening, workers are returning to their workplaces. We are poised to put the nightmare of this pandemic behind us and begin to build back our great state. There is so much to celebrate, but there's also a lot of work to do, and we are facing some very real headwinds. Outward migration, businesses that remain shuttered, record levels of unemployment. With an unprecedented $75 billion budget surplus, California right now has unprecedented resources to meet these challenges and to set our economy on a robust path for growth. But we've got to invest wisely. We've got to make smart choices right now. And I have been pushing for the restoration of California's R&D tax credit as part of this year's budget, because I really do believe that this is one of the most important policy levers that we can pull in order to encourage investment and growth in California's innovation economy. We know California life sciences companies are critical drivers of our economy. We know they create good jobs, great jobs. We also know that these are the companies who have been developing the life-saving vaccines, treatments, and therapies that are enabling us to defeat COVID-19 and put this pandemic nightmare behind us. So that's why I think this is important, and really pleased to be joined today, as I said, by my colleague, Assemblymember Mullen, and also by Matt Horton from the Milken Institute, who is going to, as I said, share a sneak preview of a study that is forthcoming from the Institute. With that, Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member, and I'm happy to be here. Just a bit of context on the Milken Institute. For those that aren't aware, the Milken Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit economic policy think tank. We focus on lots of issues around the economic development landscape. I work in our Center for Regional Economics and California Center, and focus a lot on California policy issues. And as you mentioned, Assembly Member, as the COVID-19 pandemic escalated last spring, California faced a really stark projected budgetary shortfall around $50 billion or so. The governor and the legislature took decisive action and several measures to confront this challenge. The law passed in June 20 put a cap on business tax incentives and suspended net operating loss deductions for a 3-year period. The new law significantly altered the research and development tax credit, reducing incentives for local investment, but added also uncertainty to the long-term decision-making process of firms that may be looking to conduct business and conduct research operations in California. This potentially has a long-term downstream effect on the types of jobs and activity that we can see in California, and the value capture aspect there could have long-term implications, is what we set out to look. So now, although the state's budgetary scenario has changed remarkably since last year, with a projected $70+ billion surplus, in terms of the R&D tax credit, that has not been revised, as you're well aware, and to reflect these new realities and the new prospects for growth and recovery, especially in terms of capturing high-quality job growth in the state. So given these radically different outlook this year, how can we better quantify the value of the R&D tax credit in helping to shape California's historic innovation-based economy? And how should we account for R&D's contribution to sustaining innovation, economic development in that value chain in terms of the levers that you just mentioned that the state and regional leaders can pull in terms of incentivizing growth. So in response to that kind of outlook, in updating a 2015 study, the Milken Institute set out to document the key underpinnings in establishing and sustaining the state's innovation-based economy, creating the highly trained, skilled pool of human talent and that talent pipeline that industry requires, but also capitalizing on research by converting it into private sector applications and businesses and business formation and prospects for reshoring and what that means in terms of jobs and growth. So that's what some of the research we'll be walking through here tells us, and it will be available on our website later this week with the full report release in the next 2 weeks or so. So next slide, please. As firms and businesses reorient to remote work, we think California cannot rest if it wants to maintain its past innovation advantages. We see how, what research and development funds in terms of how California leads the nation. And it's important to note here that R&D spending is largely a function of industry that are leveraging the R&D tax credits. So this is industry expenditures in R&D. Next slide. The research and development ranks highly for recent growth, specifically in the life science sectors, but across the board in terms of R&D. California's competitiveness shows through here, but as you can see, other states are gaining some ground in terms of that capturing portions of that landscape. California's competitive edge tends to coalesce lots of different industries and isn't dependent on one sector for growth, which is a highly competitive start for us. Next slide. California, leading up into the pandemic, accounted for a quarter of U.S. industry fueled growth in R&D, and that accelerated since 2014. Next slide. So what that looks like in terms of right up until the pandemic is kind of our baseline for measuring declines in business attraction and growth. Anecdotally, we're seeing firms connected to R&D, so the R&D life cycle value chain start leaving or putting resources elsewhere as that notion of certainty that we mentioned at the top line starts to diminish. Businesses, set their long-term investment strategies on that certainty. So we could start seeing some of that decline based on these numbers. Go ahead, next slide. R&D has been California's most popular tax credit, and in terms of fueling that innovation-based growth, it's important to note. Next slide. And it accounts for a sizable proportion of the R&D, as I mentioned, in the life science sector. So California's competitive edge is clear here, but also the ground that's being made by other states and what that means in terms of job placement and long-term competitiveness. Next slide. It's important here to note that California's job concentration in terms of its population size shows those downstream spillover effects and how we're capturing portions of the industry and sector fueled growth here relative to our population size. This is higher in terms of the density for job concentration in life science and biotech industries, which is very, very significant in terms of the post-COVID recovery in terms of biotech and healthcare and manufacturing jobs moving forward. Next slide. And it's really important to note here, finally, that this isn't just like a big pharma or concentration in big pharma or like high-tech PhD jobs. The R&D investments that generates growth and fuels innovation in California has long-term downstream effects in terms of the jobs that it helps support, from analysts and engineers and scientists, but even office, back office, marketing, sales, managers, tech and IT jobs that maybe not directly attributed to R&D, but nonetheless make up a sizable portion of high wage, high quality jobs in different parts of the state. Like I said, these slides and the policy brief that outline what's in the full report that will be released will be available on our website. This is some of the basis that we're using to support some of our past research that goes into support for the R&D as the foundational link in that state's value chain, fueling innovation and sector-based growth. And also, I think it's important to note a really strong catalyst for engineering a more inclusive recovery throughout the state. So thank you for letting me join, and happy to take any questions later.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Matt, for that. Appreciate your work and for giving us a sneak preview of some of the findings of that report. With that, Assemblymember Milken, welcome. Thanks so much for being here and for your partnership as we're working on what I think is this important initiative.
Absolutely, Assemblywoman. Great to be with you. Great to be with all of you. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for your leadership on this issue. And Kadi, you perfectly captured what's at stake with the potential reinstatement of an R&D tax credit. I'm delighted to join you all today as the member representing the largest biotechnology cluster in California and as chair of the Select Committee on Biotechnology. As a native of South San Francisco, I've witnessed the birth of California's biotech industry and its subsequent boom right from my own backyard. It is this very industry that has helped California and the nation move beyond this worldwide pandemic through the development of vaccines, as well as other treatments for those suffering from COVID-19. This industry employs hundreds of thousands of Californians, and its employment in scientific R&D services increased nearly 34% over the last decade, according to that research that Matt just outlined for us. That same report points out that the growth rate in biotech R&D increased nearly 146% over that same time frame. This industry is vital not only for the life-saving treatments it generates, but to the hundreds of thousands of Californians that it employs. California must maintain its competitive edge in this space and provide resources for the continued growth of the industry. And I understand just in the last couple of days, we understand that the R&D investment in the federal infrastructure package may, I emphasize may, not survive the negotiations that we're seeing on Capitol Hill. So for that reason and many others, it's imperative that we fully reinstate California's life sciences research and development tax credit to maintain California's momentum in this very competitive space. As these companies are tasked with some of today's most urgent scientific R&D, and as our state enters a stage of economic recovery, and that really is our focus now, economic recovery as we come through the pandemic, the need has never been greater. So thank you very much for the opportunity to say just a few words. We are in a very different fiscal place than we were when this initial budget action was taken. We're certainly hopeful that the governor and legislative leadership will revisit this in this current budget cycle. And again, Kadi, thank you for your vocal leadership on the issue, and I stand with you as we enter the final discussions here in the budget.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Assemblymember Milken. Grateful for your partnership and your leadership on this as well. And with that, happy to also welcome Oliver Recroy, who is joining us from the California Life Sciences Association. Oliver.
Thank you very much, Assembly members, and Matt, thank you for being here. We are delighted that you both are championing this issue on behalf of our ecosystem. The reason I call it an ecosystem, CLSA has the privilege of representing the entire ecosystem: biopharmaceutical, medical device and diagnostic, academic and research, small and medium-sized startups, companies that are really at the leading edge, the cutting edge of the application of biotechnology to the world around us. The most common example of which is, of course, human health. And our fight against the global COVID pandemic is a perfect example. But I do want to highlight some of the growing applications in what's called the bio-based economy. Things like climate change research, sustainable and renewable materials, synthetic biology, more environmentally friendly chemicals that are replacing either petrochemicals or other harsher chemicals that are harder to get rid of. Matt underscored this. Our sector currently employs 350,000 Californians. There are roughly 3,700 life science companies in the state of California, most of which are small and emerging startups. I'll use our examples. We represent, give or take, 1,200 life science companies. Less than 100 of those are big, national, well-known names. 95% of our membership are small, emerging companies that benefit not only from the R&D tax credits, but also some of the net operating loss credits. It is incredibly risky to develop some of this innovation. California's leadership has been built on creating a climate that welcomed these companies, that allowed them to grow. Assemblymember Mullen, in your district, the industry has grown out of really 30, 40 years worth of academic research, from the UC system to company formation to then the development of cures or devices. That process is incredibly lengthy, incredibly risky. The R&D credits, the incentives, are not free money. They are in exchange for significant investment made by these companies, oftentimes in the form of wages, of additional job growth. The return on investment to the state of California is really exceptional in our minds. We know that the governor himself has praised the value of the life sciences ecosystem, touting the fact that we get more venture capital funding than anywhere else in the country. We get more NIH, National Institutes of Health investment, than anywhere else in the country. We Californians love to say that we are a global leader. We cannot afford to potentially risk that global leadership over, quite frankly, a not very significant sum of resources, given the budget surplus that we have. And this pandemic was tough on everybody. We I think have made our case. We are going to continue making our case. And California is the birthplace of biotech for a reason. We want to stay here. We want to grow. We want to continue being a leader. But again, having a little bit of skin in the game and having that public-private partnership that incentivizes that leadership is critical. So thank you very much to both of you. And Matt, thank you again for all your slides.
Thanks, Oliver. And if there's any questions for folks, I think we kind of know the drill by now. You can raise your Zoom hand if you've got any questions from reporters who have joined us.
If you are a member of the media and have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat and we will go ahead and unmute you. Okay, Victoria, you are welcome to ask your question. Victoria is from Politico.
Hi, thank you all for being here. Just a quick question. Have you had actual conversations with either the administration, with leadership in terms of, do you have a sense of how amenable they are to this ask?
Well, thanks for that question. Yes, we have. We had been pushing to have this included as part of the governor's May revise. I'll share, in the run-up to the May revise, there had been quite a bit of confusion, I think, on all sides and in all states, related to some federal guidance that was released as part of the American Rescue Plan. There was some ambiguity about whether or not tax credits were permissible, even in the context of something that was being restored. So that was one of the key reasons we were told that this was not included in the May revise. Thankfully, that has been addressed, that has been cleared up, and we certainly believe that this is something that is permissible under the American Rescue Plan. And certainly it's very easy for us to demonstrate that it's California's budget surplus funds that are being utilized to restore this tax credit, and not any funds from the federal government. So that was and has been a key sticking point in negotiations. We think we've addressed that, and I think I'm encouraged by the reception we've gotten so far from leadership and from the governor's office. Assemblymember Mullen, anything else you'd add?
Assemblywoman, you captured that perfectly. There was that question sort of overhanging the initial discussions with the piece of legislation. It's now really a budget discussion with that additional clarity. I think I'm moved by the recent news about the potential lack of action on the federal level with the infrastructure package. So I think the environment we find ourselves even today is different than even 3 weeks, a month ago. So we're in the end game on the June 15th budget negotiations. I think Kadi and I will be appealing to our leadership on this. The governor, I should say, and I think I indicated this on our initial conversation as the former mayor of San Francisco. I've sat with him at groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings in San Francisco and in my hometown of South San Francisco. He fully understands the import of this industry as a job generator and a real a driver of economic growth and our economic recovery. So I'm hopeful. I'm going to remain optimistic that the governor can come to the table on this, but those discussions are happening even as we speak.
Any additional questions from members of the media? Please go ahead and raise your hand. If members of the media do have questions following up after this event, please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to get in touch and answer those.
Great. Thank you so much, Lizzie. Thanks everyone again for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, Oliver, and Matt. With that, we will keep you posted as negotiations continue to unfold. Have a great day. Take care.